grew up all over the UK. I was born in Wimbledon, and then my parents moved to Newcastle in the north of England. Then they moved to Wales. And when I was about 11 years old, the school decided to have percussion lessons. And I think I was doing violin at the time or something, and I was hopeless. I was absolutely hopeless. And the teacher said, would anybody like to audition for percussion lessons? And so I auditioned, and the drum teacher obviously saw something in me. And I switched from violin to drums and never looked back, really. I remember when I was at college, I was in this band. Jazz rock was the big thing when I was at music college. And we were all doing Herbie Hancock and Mahavishnu Orchestra and Weather Report. And so I was in this original fusion band. I think we all pulled together a couple of £100 each or something and booked a local studio and went in there and recorded. And I didn't really think about the drum sound or how you record. We just booked this studio for a day and recorded our songs and then made a little EP of our songs. I never really thought about it. In those days, it was hard to get into a studio situation. You just played live and no one ever invited you to do. It was expensive to go to studios and you weren't a top studio player or anything. And so I spent quite a few years from about 18 to 21, 22 not doing anything studio at all, just playing live. And I thought I had it all together. The drum sound was great and everything. Eventually, a couple of people that I was working with were doing some low-level recording sessions and said, would I like to be involved? So I went along, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire, because then I started to work with recording engineers who were a bit more tough on the drummer. And I always say you have to learn to be a studio drummer. You're not born with the ability to be a studio drummer. So it took me a couple of years to actually get that together. And the only way I got it together was listening to what was coming back off the tape and thinking it sounded horrible, and asking the recording engineer, why does it sound so horrible? What can I do differently? And it took me a couple of years of actually trying to figure out what I needed to do to be a better studio drummer. Well, I started to do some quite serious studio work, but I was never quite satisfied with the way that I sounded. And I had a friend who was producing albums in Italy, and I was going over to Italy and playing drums on these albums. They were quite successful albums, sold quite a lot of copies actually. And then we did this Italian album with this Italian singer, and the singer said, I really like Chris, but I really want to get somebody like Jerry Marotta in as well. I really like his sound. Let's get him in. I was lucky that they didn't just boot me off the album. So I got to play on like 5 songs, and Jerry Marotta got to play on 6 songs. And the producer said, why don't you come down the days Jerry's here and hang out and see what you think? So I went down there, and Jerry Marotta turned up. He'd been working with Peter Gabriel, so he had his drums in the UK. He turned up to the studio, set up his drums, and I was just thinking, oh, he's using all different drums to what I normally use. He's using all different heads to what I normally use. And he tuned them all up, set it all up, and he started hitting the snare. And it sounded horrible. It was like ringing all over the place, buzz everywhere. The toms were all ringing. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be a disaster. And they said, okay, we're ready to start the first song. So I went into the control room and they counted off the first song, and he started to play, and I thought, oh God, this is amazing. And this is exactly the sound I've been searching for. And I think the mistake that I'd been making was that my drums sounded absolutely perfect in the room. Squeaky clean, very tight and damped down, and perfect in a small room. When you put them with the guitars and the bass, they just sounded like cardboard boxes. And when Jerry Marotta played, everything sounded larger than life in the room. It was all buzzing, rattling, ringing, and enormous. But when you put it on the track with the guitars and the bass and the keyboards, it just sank in beautifully, gelled the whole thing together, and just sounded exciting as well. The whole Jerry Marotta thing, I've talked about it a lot before, but the whole Jerry Marotta thing was a complete epiphany for me and completely changed everything I did, and my career basically started from then. So it was lucky that I got booted off half an album, basically. Coincidentally, it was through the same person that I'd been working on these Italian albums with, a guy called Simon Boswell. One of his best friends was Paul's secretary, and he'd been having dinner with her one night, and she said, oh, Paul's thinking of trying to find some new musicians to hang out with. new people for a band, and he said, oh, I know a great drummer who'd be perfect for that. And so I came home like on Friday night at sort of midnight one night after some shows, and there was a message on the answering machine, oh, it's Sheila from Paul McCartney's office, can you give us a call? I thought, oh Christ, it's Friday night, I've got to wait till Monday now to find out what this is about. And so on the Monday I called them up, hello, it's Chris Whitten, and they said, oh, well, we're just doing some jam sessions, nothing big, we're just doing some jam sessions. So Paul wondered if you'd like to come along and do some jamming and everything. So, oh, that sounds great. And she said, oh, we'll call you back with all the details. So a few days later, they called me back and said, oh, we're going to be at this warehouse rehearsal space on this day. Can you bring your drums and come along? And Paul come down and we'll just play. And the manager came in and said, oh, this is what we're going to do. Paul's going to arrive and we're just going to play some jam some songs. It's just fun. There's nothing else. We just want to play with some people, have some fun instead of all the high pressure pop star stuff. And so I set up my drums. Paul arrived and the whole thing was a big blur. And they said, oh, we just want to play some rock and roll. It was just lucky that I was in New York for a while, busking with a friend of mine from New Zealand, and we survived in New York for a winter busking, and we were playing all these Chuck Berry songs and Little Richard on the street, just with a snare drum. He was guitar and I was playing snare. And so I sort of vaguely knew the arrangements of the songs and everything, so there was no music or rehearsal or anything. Paul just said, okay, 25 rock, 2, 3, 4, and we were straight into it. So you just had to, oh, I think I know this, and just play along kind of thing. So that was what we did, and we did that for like 2 hours. And I went, oh, that's great, okay, see you again sometime. But then luckily about a week later I got a phone call, oh, we're going to do another jam session, why don't you come down? So that was great, because that time I knew what it was going to be, and I just got to soak up the moment and think more about, oh, I'm playing with this guy. And he was playing lead guitar because he's bored with bass. He just wanted to play lead guitar and do loads of solos and everything. So it sort of came to an end after a couple of these, and the manager phoned me up and said, well, what Paul would like to do is just document it. So we're going to do a day in the studio with everybody that he's been jamming with, and we're going to record some of these songs. Same deal, we'll just count them off and play them. There's going to be no click tracks, no rehearsals. So I turned up at this studio, and yeah, we set up the drums, mic'd it all up, got a quick drum sound, and recorded this all these rock and roll songs, the Chuck Berry stuff and everything. And eventually they released it. They were so pleased with the results, they released it just in Russia, which was still communist country at that time. And that was like sort of June 1987, and that was it. It was sort of goodbye, thanks guys. And I was still playing with Julian Cope, and Julian Cope was booked to play in North America supporting Susie and the Banshees. So off we went. Towards the end of the tour we got to a motel, and there was a message in my little pigeonhole when we got to the motel, can you call Paul McCartney's office urgently? And so it was all very exciting, and it was a little bit awkward as well, because I was in a cheap motel somewhere in Seattle, Washington, making this transatlantic call with the band I was currently playing with all listening in and everything. It was all very awkward. I phoned up the office and they said, oh, Paul really enjoyed playing with you and he wants to know when you're going to be back and we might do some more stuff. I called them up when we got back from this Julian Cope tour, and Paul's doing a Christmas single and we're going to do a video for it. Paul would like you to be in it, and then there might be some TV shows, Wogan and all the chat shows to promote it after that. We'll see how it goes. For the next few months we promoted his Christmas. I hadn't played on the single, I think it was Dave Mattox. He'd been recording it while I was away. So we went and did this Christmas single and played all over Europe, and was flying off in suddenly from being an indie rock band, we were flying off in private jets to Milan to do a TV show, and then Paris the next week to do a TV show, and limos here and there, and champagne and everything. So yeah, it was all very good, very nice.